The light was so dim that Jaime could scarcely see her, though they stood a scant few feet apart. In this light, she could almost be a beauty, he thought. In this light, she could almost be a knight. The thoughts of Jaime Lannister about Brienne of Tarth. A Storm of Swords, Chapter 44, Jaime 6. When I first read the Brienne point of view chapters from A Feast for Crows, I wasn't a huge fan. Like a lot of first time readers, I think I was generally overwhelmed by all the new characters and plot threads added into the story during A Feast for Crows. Coming off the back of A Storm of Swords, it did kind of feel like the pace of the story had ground to a snail's pace. But when I reread the books for the first time, I really did enjoy A Feast for Crows much more, and especially appreciated what it had to offer. Hell, I even enjoyed our brief time with Aerys Oakhart. And in terms of theory crafting and potential future impact on the story, it really has a lot to offer the more you dig into it. I do find Brienne a really compelling character, but oddly, even though she is a key point of view character, there is surprisingly little we know about her background. And well, House Tarth in general. We don't know or have any information about her mother, or even what the house words of House Tarth are. But as more nuggets of information have come out over time, during the long wait for the Winds of Winter, it's become clear that this surprising lack of detail by George R.R. Martin might in fact be by design, because there is a huge mystery at the heart of Brienne. And with the release of The World of Ice and Fire, some things may have clicked into place that have created a very compelling fan theory that Brienne is a descendant of Ser Duncan The Tall of the Knight of the Seven Kingdom novellas, but also has Targaryen blood, with House Tarth having a strong claim to the Iron Throne should both Stannis Baratheon and Tyrion Baratheon die in the Winds of Winter. In this video, we're going to be breaking down each element of this theory, discussing the impact on the story, and why George R.R. Martin has been intentionally designing his world lore to hide some of these facts. When you first read the books, it's really easy to miss the connection between Ser Duncan the Tall, the protagonist of the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms short stories, and Brienne. And for the most part, until A Feast for Crows, all we really had to go on was the language and grammar used by George to describe both Duncan and Brienne, being very similar, with their strength and height being the most prominent features that stand out. But also, it goes deeper to a much more thematic level. In Brienne 9 of A Feast for Crows, we also get what, at the time, seemed like a simple Easter egg, referencing Ser Duncan, with Brienne remembering seeing his personal heraldry on a shield in the armory at Evenfall Hall on Tarth. When she repaints her own shield while searching for Arya and Sansa Stark in the Riverlands, remembering this heraldry, she asks for it to be painted on her own shield. While some fans did just see these elements as Easter eggs, some did begin to believe there was some kind of connection between Duncan and Brienne. George R.R. Martin at first confirmed a descendant of Ser Duncan does appear in the main book series, but at a convention in 2016, he would elaborate on this further by confirming that Brienne is that descendant, and it would be revealed in time. Now, as cool as this idea was, it did leave fans with a few questions, specifically about the nature of this descendant, for two reasons. Firstly, Duncan having a child would have had to have happened before he became a member of the Kingsguard. While he could of course break his vows, it's not something I really see him personally doing. We also know next to nothing about the extended House Tarth family tree, and how this descendant fits into it. Another question we are left with is the mechanics of the descendant. Given Duncan was unmarried, it's assumed there'd be some kind of affair or scandal that maybe resulted in the birth of a bastard, with the true parentage of this bastard likely hidden, especially if Duncan was having an affair with a noblewoman. Really, we don't know how it works. George has intentionally left the Aegon V part of the World of Ice and Fire vague for a reason. He wants to preserve these mysteries, and hopefully reveal them in text himself. But this intentional vagueness may indeed point us in a solid direction that gives us a few possibilities regarding Brienne's descent, especially when you factor in the clues regarding House Tarth's supposed dragon blood. Now, narrowing down where House Tarth's Targaryen blood comes from is easier said than done, Given the language used in the World of Ice and Fire, to me it seems this connection between the two houses is quite recent, likely within the last 100 years. Also, at least from my reading of the choice of grammar used, it seems to imply someone of Targaryen blood marrying into House Tarth, rather than say another house with Targaryen ancestry marrying into the Tarths. So we're talking an actual Targaryen here. And secondly, this person who perhaps marries into House Tarth is not important enough to casually be recalled, even by members of the house. Because it does kind of strike me as odd that if House Tarth does have recent Targaryen descent, only about a generation above that of Robert Baratheon's own Targaryen descent, that they don't boast of it the way House Baratheon or, say, House Waters do. Thus, this member of House Targaryen who marries into House Tarth, while the blood of the dragon, are not really much to note of historically. Now, if we take a moment to have a look at the Targaryen family tree, you can see how well thought out and extensive it is post Aegon's conquest. Nearly everyone is accounted for. In a lot of cases, even cousins and relatives no longer that close to the main line. The intermarrying between House Targaryen and a lot of these cousins, prior to the Dance of the Dragons, does help us keep track of everyone in some respects. That is until we get to the reigns of Aerys I, Maegor and Aegon V. Specifically, this post-Blackfire Rebellion era. When it comes to the children of Maegor, there is a lot of unknowns regarding not only his children, but some of his grandchildren too. Not just in regard to their eventual fates, but their life in general. If they married or had children, many of these people just disappear from this well-documented family genealogy. It seems odd, or maybe even intentional by George, in order to preserve some of the mysteries and stories for future Duncan Egg novellas. It's why I suspect Fire and Blood will in fact have 3 volumes and not 2 like many fans think, with volume 2 ending after the first Blackfire Rebellion, again to protect the mysteries surrounding the reign of King Aegon V and the stories we know George wants to tell. If he does concede that he does not have the time to write more Duncan Egg, given the current situation with the Winds of Winter and the rest of the main book series, maybe a Fire and Blood Volume 3 style book covering the reign of Aegon V might be something that happens. Regardless, this period between about 131 AC to around 250 is the perfect time for this Targaryen-Tarth marriage to happen. There are enough Targaryens with no clear fate, but not quite vital enough to allow for the fact that the Tarths having Targaryen blood is all but a footnote. Where could this Targaryen blood come from? There are a handful of candidates, but out of all of them, 2 certainly seem likely when you consider the revelation regarding Duncan being an ancestor of Brienne. House Tarth's family tree prior to Selwyn Tarth, Brienne's father, is not known to us. We don't even know how they connect to the other Tarths in lore. So there is plenty of scope to go back 2 or 3 generations where there could have been a Targaryen marriage at some point. Now when talking about the idea of this possible match, it is fair to address the fact that on paper it does strike you as being a bit odd. House Tarth are not one of the powerful great houses, or even one of the more influential allies of House Targaryen. They historically had much closer ties with the liege lords of House Baratheon, and the Durrandon Storm Kings before them were members of the house marrying into the Durrandons several times. So this idea of a Targaryen marrying into House Tarth is rightly scrutinised. So it would suggest if any kind of match did happen, it was a lower member of the house, a third daughter or son, or perhaps a person whose, let's say, honour had come into question and thus married off quickly to a house not bothered by the potential scandal given the value of a royal match. Regardless of what may or may not have happened, it was kept low-key and quiet. The first possible match I think we have is Daenora Targaryen, the daughter of Rhaegal Targaryen. She would marry her cousin Aerion Brightflame, with the two having a son, Maegor, born in 232 AC. When Aerion died that same year by drinking wildfire, Daenora still would have been in her mid-20s, so would have been the perfect age to remarry, like many young widows in Westeros would do. Along with her son, Maegor, they disappear from history in 233 AC when their claims to the throne are dismissed by the Great Council of 233. I can see a situation where Daenora is married off to a small house in the wake of the Great Council by Aegon V as a way to secure his own position as king. The fact both Daenora and her son just vanish suggests this may not be the case, given, with the other possibilities, we at least know they did in fact marry. Given the idea Maegor, a male Targaryen, could have married and had children would certainly cause an issue when it comes to Robert's rebellion a few decades later, which is why it's unlikely there is this whole forgotten branch of House Targaryen out there, given the context of Aerys II's downfall and the rise of House Baratheon. To me, this indicates that Maegor likely did die young, and given the lack of any information about his mother, maybe she died as well. We then come to who I think are the most likely candidates to have married into House Tarth, the two sisters of King Aegon V, Daella Targaryen and Rhae Targaryen. We know very little about them as people, other than they marry and both have children. This information comes via their elder brother, Maester Aemon, during A Feast for Crows chapter 35, Samwell 4. The dying Aemon wonders aloud if, when he dies, he will hear Daella and Rhae sing to their children, which is implied to have been a true event from his past. While we can make an argument that these could just be the ramblings of a dying man, the idea of Daella and Rhae marrying and having children is much more likely than them not. Plus, what we must also consider here is that much like the situation with many Targaryens of this era, we don't know their fates. When we look at the family tree around them, and even go back a few generations, Daella and Rhae seem to be the only two Targaryens who fit the criteria needed to work for this House Tarth match. Okay, so we narrowed down the possible matches to Daella and Rhae. How does then Duncan fit into all of this? Well, we certainly have some solid ideas. There's not much we can say with certainty in this case. While much of this idea currently is speculation, it's speculation that is backed up with a few bits of evidence perhaps pointing in the correct direction. The theory goes that sometime after Maegor became king in 221, when Dunk and Egg's adventures around the Seven Kingdoms have come to an end with the pair spending much more time at court, that Ser Duncan had an affair with one of Aegon's sisters, Daella or Rhae, with his affair resulting in a pregnancy. I tend to think given that Daella is older than Aegon, probability slightly favours her over Rhae, who is Aegon's younger sister. Fans speculate to try and cover up this potential scandal, this daughter was then married off. It's possible the pregnancy was kept hidden, or the house in question who was being married into were more than happy to turn a blind eye to gain such a Targaryen match. So it's speculated that either Daella or Rhae then married Samwell Tarth's great-grandfather, with the match being played down and hardly mentioned by the Tarths, given that they would want to hide the Duncan affair element of it. Now, there's also another possibility that's slightly less complicated. Perhaps Daella or Rhae had already married a member of House Tarth and were living at Evenfall Hall, and at some point Aegon and Duncan visit Tarth, with then the alleged affair between Duncan and a sister of Aegon happens, resulting in the pregnancy and a bastard that could easily be covered up. It would also then explain why Duncan's shield with his heraldry could be found at Evenfall Hall. I personally much preferred this version of the theory than the affair happening pre-marriage. But let's face it, none of these theories are perfect, and both have their negative points to them. Because the truth is, as much as I do enjoy these theories, in terms of solid hard evidence for them, we really have next to nothing. It's really a combination of the knowledge of Duncan being related to Brienne, and knowing there's some kind of Targaryen ancestry in House Tarth, and then narrowing that down to Daella and Rhae. So yes, we know the Duncan connection is real, and while I personally am confident in my conclusion that the Targaryen match into House Tarth would be Daella or Rhae, while this connection between them and Duncan is possible, in either circumstance of the affair happening before a marriage or after a marriage, it is all speculative for now. In the end, the Targaryen part of Brienne's ancestry will not matter much at all, and I doubt it would even have much significance to the plot. Her connection to Duncan, however, is much more important, in how Duncan's story and Brienne's thematically mirror each other in a lot of ways. But here's the thing, if it is indeed true Brienne has Targaryen blood, then Brienne and her father could be much further up the line of succession than you might first think. If we take Tommen and Myrcella as being illegitimate, given Jaime is their father, and say House Baratheon are the rightful kings due to rights of conquest, then there is a timeline where you could possibly make a claim that Selwyn and Brienne would be maybe the third or fourth in line to the throne after Stannis and Shireen. It's kind of hard to say unless we had a more detailed Baratheon family tree. But given how recent the Baratheon-Targaryen connection is, there's not really much scope for any potential lost Targaryen cousins, with the only other possibility being a legitimized bastard such as Edric Storm. But if we do follow the line of succession back up to Stannis' grandmother, Rhaella Targaryen, the daughter of Aegon V, if indeed House Tarth does descend from a match with either Daella or Rhae, it would mean Selwyn and Brienne are the next most direct Targaryen descendants and claimant that we know of. After that, it would seem it would then pass back up to House Martell via the match between Princess Daenerys and Maron Martell. Then after that, the descendants of Aelena Targaryen. So House Waters, House Plum, House Penrose. Following that, we then have to go back even further to the match between Alan Velaryon and Baela Targaryen, putting House Velaryon in contention with a claim, with House Hightower after them via Rhaena Targaryen, and her marriage to an unknown Hightower. But at this point, all of these descendants are very distant. But the point I was trying to make with all this is that, relatively speaking, should this theory turn out to be true, it puts Selwyn and Brienne much closer to the Iron Throne than you might actually think, which is an important thought experiment, given how perilous Stannis and Shireen's situation seems to be in the Winds of Winter. But at the end of the day, the king or queen is the person with the power to take the throne and hold it. Aegon took the Seven Kingdoms, as did Robert. Who knows what could happen with the wildcard that is Aegon and Jon Connington, or when Daenerys finally looks west. And hell, even Jon Snow at this rate. This is a fun idea and a fun theory, but the reason I really wanted to talk about it is because it really shows just how well constructed George's lore can be. Yes, there are some vague and missing elements to it, but the more you dig into it, the more you realise they are that way by design. Is Brienne a descendant of Duncan? Yes. Does she have Targaryen blood? Yes. Are Daella and Rhae the source of that blood? I personally think the balance of probability suggests they were. Did Duncan have an affair with Daella or Rhae? I think this is still very much open for debate, but given House Tarth are his descendants, he had to have come into the bloodline somewhere, so via Aegon's sisters would actually make sense. Will we ever find out the truth? Only George R. R. Martin knows that answer.